I'm very thankful to all of you just for being here and for coming out to hear a little bit about the work that we at the FOR do, and I think that we in the broader anti-military community do around the issue of junior ROTC. Chairman Mao, one of those all-time greats that some of us still remember, said that to be attacked by one's enemy is not a bad thing, but a good thing. And let me just tell you, I got raked over the coals this afternoon. I got whopped upside the head. Somebody had set up, I won't say who, but it's cool. Somebody had set up an opportunity for me to be on KVI. Oh! See, I didn't know all that. See, I didn't know this, you know. I mean, I thought, yo, that might be a Pacifica station, so I'm at home, but not quite. So I was on a KVI talk program, Steve Siegel's afternoon talk program, talking about JROTC to an audience that, let us say, charitably was a little bit less than receptive to the word. And, you know, we talked about the FOR. We talked a little bit about why we thought JROTC was such a bad idea for young people. And, of course, you know, I was called everything but a child of God by everybody that called in. But I was glad that I had an opportunity to do that, Milton and others, and I wanted to thank Milton Carr for doing that, because it gives us a sense of what the body politic, you know, that quote-unquote, you know, kind of standard packaged process North American thinking is about militarism in the broad sense and about the specific issue of young people being courted by the military inside their own schools. I don't think, if my reading is correct, that I have to do a whole lot of preaching to the choir. So let me just say a few things about why the military has started this program, or actually started the expansion of the program that was evident from 1992 to 1996. B, what generally the activist community around the country is doing in terms of countering JROTC, and C, what I think some of the challenges are, but also what I think some of the opportunities are given the current economic and political climate in the United States. The Fellowship of Reconciliation, first of all, and I think there are a lot of FOR people here, so this is going to be real old hat for the FOR folk, but the Fellowship of Reconciliation is a organization of women and men throughout the world that believe in the power of active nonviolence as a personal commitment, but also as a social commitment. So we put our work around military issues, whether it's draft counseling or emergency service for people that are inducted, or counter recruitment, or work to get people out of the delayed entry program, or whatever it is. We put our work in the context of a belief that militarism and armies are wrong, they are morally unjustified. We don't apologize for that. We're proud of that statement. We believe that in order to make a case for peace, you have to basically declare that war is immoral, and that we will not participate either in hopefully financing it, and many people are war tax resistors, or in advocating induction and conscription, or in any kind of justification for support for war under any circumstances. A.J. Muste, who was one of the, I guess, guiding lights and founding, not the founding person, but one of the pioneers of the work that we do, and the War Resisters League and FOR are sort of sister organizations. A.J. Muste basically said that the power of the state to make war is based on two fundamental pillars. One pillar is the ability to tax people and to get money out of our, you know, income taxes to devote to war, and the second is is conscription. That is the ability to take young people, usually male but not exclusively so, into the army and force them to fight. Now, in the second instance, we don't have a national draft anymore. You know, the national draft, thank God, has been abolished. There are many people who want to bring it back. We have not quite gotten as far as abolishing registration, which I think is a major struggle, and it comes up every year in terms of appropriation bills in both the House and the Senate, or and in other communities who are talking about the need to end registration. But what we're faced with right now is a situation where the military, without the power of the draft, uses the power of seduction and lies and propaganda to induce young people into the military, not because they have to go in, but because they think it's a hip thing to do. Now, we know what junior ROTC is. I'm sure that many of you know more about the program than I do. Many of you probably are on the front lines of work around specific struggles in communities to oppose JROTC and to build alliances that will make JROTC exposed as the absolute fraud that it is. But what's necessary for us, I think, to do is to maybe examine a little bit in the dominion or specific area of military thinking as to why, after almost 80 years of existence, 76 years I guess to be exact, the military has decided to pump up the volume on junior ROTC. The ROTC program in both the college and the high school dimensions of ROTC was brought into existence by federal legislation in 1916. It's basically, they said that in order to provide for manpower training, at that point manpower, I'm not being sexist in my language, but specifically at that point it was men, in order to provide for a flow of people into the officer corps outside the service academies and the other training programs the military had for officer training, that they needed to have these programs for the most part on college campuses, but also in many cases on high school campuses. So I uncovered in digging up information that the first junior ROTC program in San Francisco was in 1919. Didn't start recently, it started back then. And the program kind of meandered along. It turned out military officers in large numbers for the Second World War in Korea and Vietnam. But an interesting thing happened in 1992, or I should say an unfortunate thing happened. There was really a convergence of 3 different reasons why JROTC became more prominent. First reason was that people in the military do 50-year strategic plans. So the military is very organized and very smart in its understanding of not the morality of war, obviously, but the need, the material needs to wage war, not just now, but well into the 21st century. But in the last 2 years, we have seen a 20-year demographic low in terms of the number of eligible 18-year-olds in the population. Demographers look at, like trends, like there's a baby boom trend, and then there's going to be a, like a trend when the baby boomers have their kids, and, they can kind of predict population shifts up and down. But there are just fewer 18-year-olds around now than there were at the end of the period of Vietnam War conscription. So that's one factor. Military understands that there are just fewer bodies around. Second factor is that the military understands and understood 4 years ago that they were facing a stiff opposition in terms of public opinion, particularly in communities of color, and more particularly among young people who, when polled about their willingness to serve and how hip they thought the military was, would say, I ain't down with this, I ain't down with this blood for oil thing, and if I can do anything other than go into the military, I'm going to do it. So despite a $2 billion recruitment budget, which is basically a propaganda budget that we fight every day around attitudes vis-a-vis the military, young people in large numbers were saying, you want me to go, but I ain't down with this. I don't want to go in. I'm not ready and willing to do what you think I should do with my life, Uncle Sam. So the third thing was the fact that the military, in addition to the previous 2 factors, recognized that there were on the horizon, and now in actuality, competitive programs that, although not as large as the military, could siphon off some of the 18-year-olds that might be induced to go into the Marine Corps. So we have AmeriCorps, which is not a huge program. In the first year, there were only 20,000 AmeriCorps young people throughout the country. There were civilian conservation corps of various kinds. The colleges, which were also looking at the dip demographically in 18-year-olds, needed as capitalist institutions also needed to get more young people or assure that they had a fairly ready supply of students coming into the 2- and 4-year colleges, so the colleges were kind of gearing up to recruit a little bit more and be more aggressive in talking to the guidance counselors. And there's possibly a fourth thing, and that is that the military recognized that in the absence of a in the absence of an environment where it was easy to recruit, that there would just be a lot of young people who would just sort of slip through the cracks. You know, they might go to college, or they might go to college, or they might choose some kind of occupation, or the peace movement might grab some of them and they might turn into counter recruiters. But they knew that the effectiveness of their $2 billion spent on these, you know, lunatics running around and, you know, grabbing young people in pizza parlors and saying, you know, you want to be in the Army. They knew that that was somewhat challenged because of all the other reasons. So Colin Powell and then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney were the architects of the expansion of junior ROTC as a national Department of Defense priority, and were the architects of this program that was going to push junior ROTC from roughly 1,400 schools in around 1990, 1991 to as many as 3,500 schools in the U.S. and the U.S. territories in 1996. So they wanted to see not just a moderate increase in recruitment inside the schools, because that's what it is, a recruitment program, but they wanted to actually see a more than doubling, you know, a 250% increase of JROTC programs. Because where more effectively can you get a child, young person to do something, a young adult to do something, than in the classroom, where they're, at least if they're going to school, a captive audience. You know, they don't have the option of walking out of a classroom the way they can walk out of a recruitment office. And if it's sold, and again, if it's sold as a discipline program or a citizenship program or a value inculcation program, then the military basically is home free. So they get to, you know, profit from the disintegration of U.S. public education by walking in with their propaganda and their very slick PR. In many ways, it's very good PR for them, not moral, but effective, to say that, well, look, Mr. Ms. Principal, Mr. Ms. Guidance Counselor, you know, your kids are hanging out and smoking weed and, you know, getting high and having babies early and not coming to class and not interested in learning and, you know, possibly even horror, you know, pulling out guns on each other. Of course, the military doesn't consider, you know, killing 3,000 people in Panama to be murder, but, you know, all the stuff the military says to the high school, you know, decision makers and the Board of Ed decision makers is the reason that they need the military in the schools. And to a person, those of us who talk to military people in the JROTC program find that they're remarkably adept at saying that it's not a recruitment program, it's really for the kids, and they have the freedom to do what they want to do. Okay, so that kind of lays the demographic and political scenario for the growth of junior ROTC. One thing that my friend Harold Jordan at the American Friends Service Committee is very fond of saying, and I think it's very true, is that when times get hard, people turn to false gods. And many of the teachers and the administrators and the parents that are facing the crisis going on, particularly in urban education, and the crisis going on in the larger economy in terms of the massive attack on the working class, the export of jobs, the proliferation of low-paying dead-end jobs when jobs are available, the lack of meaningful work, recognize that there is a crisis in education but also a crisis in the job market and in the future prospects of you know, young people when they get out of school, which is really, in my opinion, a crisis in capitalism, but that's another topic. I don't want to sound like too communist today, you know what I'm saying? But all of that simply meant is that the military had an open door, and so the junior ROTC program, as all of us know, was implemented and structured as a covert recruitment program in the guise of just another, you know, elective that young people could take. We know, I think, also that junior ROTC, whether you look at it from the standpoint of the intrinsic value of the curriculum or the value system that it orients young people toward, or even the advantages that young people might have, quote unquote, when they go in the program, is an absolute fraud. In the first instance, the curriculum, and there's an excellent study that I think many of you probably already know about that was done by the American Friends Service Committee by two professors at the University of North Carolina, Leslie Barrett and Catherine Lutz. They did a book called Making Soldiers in the Public Schools. It's a comprehensive study of the junior ROTC program, primarily from the curriculum perspective. And they look at the leadership education and training manuals that exist for Army ROTC and the other service branches, and they find out things like, very interesting things. Among them are things like black people in the United States basically have proven their worth as citizens by their willingness to fight in wars. They say and die in wars. I mean, they say things like, fortunate for the U.S. Army, the policy of driving the Indians westward and wiping them out was successful. That's a direct quote from LET. They do not mention the women's movement as being central to the forward motion of the society. They do not mention the civil rights movement. They do not mention movements for human rights in the gay and lesbian community. They do not mention any environmental struggles. They mention none of this as any part worthy of mention in the discussion of U.S. history. What they do say, and say very clearly, is that soldiers are trained to obey orders. They say that a military organization is based upon loyalty to the chain of command. They do say that basically the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki might have been controversial, but it was a good decision in the long run, because they repeat the lie that 500,000 or so U.S. troops who would have died in the invasion of the mainland Japanese islands, was averted by killing 400,000 Japanese civilians in these two cities. They do not challenge any prevailing notion of standard orthodox Euro-American racist pro-capitalist history. They do not say, for example, that the war in Panama was not effective in terms of interdicting the drug traffic. It just happened to kill, depending on who you listen to, between 5,000 and 10,000 innocent Panamanians who are not supporters of Noriega or drug traffickers. They don't talk about the slaughter on the road from Kuwait City to Baghdad of Iraqi troops that were surrendering. They don't talk about the U.S. Army's vicious intervention in Central and South America, the support for dictatorship, the use of the military to overthrow elected governments. For example, in 1953, we know that the CIA, as a branch of the military establishment, was instrumental in overthrowing the elected premier of Iran. They don't talk about any kind of action on the part of the U.S. military that might be morally questionable. What they basically say is what you get out of the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and the Cub Scouts, and that is that, my country, right or wrong, but my country. And so in the context of the distortions and the, let me just get to another thing, and that is that what is a curriculum actually other than this, in my opinion, distorted view of history? Well, most of the hours that young people spend in junior ROTC is spent in drill. Putting those little, putting those uniforms on and polishing the brass, like I had to do when I was a cadet, in college, before I got saved, so to speak. Polishing the brass and, and marching around with toy guns or shooting real target weapons, but basically inculcating young people into the efficacy of routine and drill as a definition of discipline. That is, in order to be disciplined, you must do what people tell you to do, and do it when they say do it, and do it without questioning the reasons that they tell you to do that. That's really what drill is. Now, my sidebar right now is that I have a lot of arguments with people about what discipline is. My personal feeling as a person who was a teacher for a couple of years and who's worked with young people over the last 20 years is that Yeah, discipline is necessary, but being a parade martinet, you know, like marching around and saluting, I mean, that's how the SS trained people to, you know, wipe out, you know, victims of Nazism in Europe. I mean, that's not discipline. That's simply a very perverted notion of, you know, the idea that if you do what other people tell you to do, you're being disciplined. Discipline is simply self-mastery, which one can get from many nonviolent and holistic ways of personal growth. I mean, so Tai Chi, you know, sitting meditation, you know, conflict resolution skills are all forms of discipline, but the military doesn't recognize that as discipline. So the discipline argument is very often used as the way in which JROTC, you know, operates. So I think basically I don't really have to make much of an argument. I mean, I think we're all here because we recognize that you know, that militarism in the school system is not a way either to train young people for productive careers or to prepare a society for a greater appreciation for nonviolence, or in fact to gain you know, prestige and security for the people of this society. I think that we have to grapple with some more complex issues, but always, you know, grapple with them from the context of being nonviolent activists.
Excuse me, Clayton. I'd just like to interject that there may be people here who are parents.
Okay.
That, you know, it might be people that, you know, seriously want to know.
So I'm not preaching to the choir altogether, huh?
No, not necessarily.
Oh, I see.
There's going to be a mixture.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry. All right. What then, I guess, to kind of get into the concluding part before we talk, what then is the way in which we organize or might need to look at organizing around the issue of junior ROTC? And I can see three major things that we probably all recognize, but I think explicitly need to communicate. Number one is the idea that nonviolence from both a community and a societal perspective is valuable, useful, and workable. I think we need to understand that the people who believe that we live in a violent world and therefore need to train young people in the art of violence miss the point that nonviolence, whether we're talking about community conflicts or civil conflicts in a large society or international conflicts, has been proven to work. Nonviolent intervention happens. It happened during the Second World War in Denmark and many other places where people were non-cooperative with the occupation forces. It happened in Vietnam when you had people who were certainly against the imperial invasion of U.S. troops, but who opposed them not with guns, but with acts of courage and moral conscience. It happened in our own history in the civil rights movement, where over a long period of years, people were willing to accept suffering in an organized way because they knew that nonviolence tactically and strategically can work to resolve conflict and overcome injustice. So I think we need to be grounded in a realization that nonviolence works. And if nonviolence works, then we need to be aware of how deeply the society that we live in is invested in violence. The prison industry is an investment in violence. Local police forces that are armed to the teeth is an investment in violence. And obviously, the military in all of its manifestations is an investment in violence. The military budget, if you count all the things that go into it, is well over $320 billion a year. Not just what's on paper, but also the portion of the national interest on the national debt that's related to the military, covert operations, maintaining a national quote-unquote security system, foreign military assistance, emergency preparation for war within the United States, It's a real big part of what we pay our taxes for, and there's some information on that table from the War Resisters League that will break some of those numbers down and explain that. We also need to recognize that I think the second recognition is that everybody's not going to necessarily be swayed by the idea of peace and nonviolence. So we then have to have an economic analysis of the military and society, which I just kind of sketched out, but also an economic analysis of what young people don't get when they go into the military and then come out. And if God help them, they can come out reasonably intact without having to fight a war. Here are some of the things they can look forward to. 12% of male military people who are, who pass through the military, who are discharged, and 6% of women actually get job skills that they can apply in civilian life, which is to say that 88% of the men and 94% of the women do not get skills, according to most studies, that they can use. The equipment, the computer software, all of that is very different in the civilian world. So young people who get conned into thinking that I'm going to come out of the military and get me a job usually find that if they get a job, it had nothing to do with what they learned in the service. Another thing to recognize is that there's enormous discrimination within the military against women. Obviously there's homophobia and many of its violent manifestations against gay and lesbian people. Obviously, or at least in terms of statistics, 1 out of 3 African American males, I don't know what the numbers are for African American women or other people of color, but 1 out of 3 African American males, a third of those men come out of the military with a less than honorable discharge. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you come out with LTH, you don't get veterans benefits. You don't get, if you put money into the GI Bill, Montgomery GI Bill, I mean, that's gone. You don't get like a check you don't get a refund check like with the IRS if you're lucky enough to have a job. You don't get any kind of VA benefits if you get sick and go into a hospital. You don't get any VHA benefits if you want to buy a house. So basically, you just wasted, your year or 2 years or whatever you spent in because you got kicked out, and you don't get a good job reference from your last employer. So that's the reality of 1 out of 3 people. 1 out of 3 people who are homeless who are men who are homeless in the city of New York were former service people. They're vets. Okay, so obviously there's a big chunk of people coming out of the military, including, by the way, veterans of the Gulf War. People do studies about like who's homeless and why and for how long, and they find that not only are these men coming out of Vietnam or some other kind of service during that period, but some of them actually served in the 1990s and they don't have any place to live. All right. We also need to recognize, I think, in terms of an argument that all of the reasons for training young people in this nonsense can be easily countered by the existence of something on the outside, i.e. something that's nonviolent, that can be a substitute. The biggest challenge that we have, I think, is to come up with resource booklets, resource lists, resource pamphlets in a given community that can tell young people about scholarships and job training and public service training and so on that might be available that they don't know about. We know that there is no peace dividend. We know we've got to fight like hell to create resources, but we also know that a lot of young people are just not aware of the resources that they have at their disposal other than the military. Finally, let me just say one thing about our ongoing work. We at FOR are involved in a project in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island, that's organizing teachers, peace activists, parents of students, students themselves into a coalition that, like many of your coalitions, is looking at connecting all of these different issues and presenting them in a way that both young people and parents and teachers and principals can understand. I don't expect that the great majority of people in any city or even in this society are going to automatically be, converted into, Gandhian, Kingian, nonviolent, loving people overnight. I mean, that's like expecting that I'm going to get on the plane to go back to New York free. I might want to think about it, but it's not likely to happen. What I do think, however, is likely is that as coalitions like ours begin to connect issues and connect resources and make both moral and economic and pedagogical or educational arguments about JROTC, junior ROTC, that it's likely that more people will recognize that junior ROTC is not just a fraud, but a very dangerous fraud perpetuated against young people. It's going to be a difficult struggle. We do have some examples. Recently, for example, we talked a little bit about in an earlier meeting that Portland, Oregon, back at the end of August, its school system voted to kick the military out of the classroom in terms of recruitment. There are places throughout the United States that have successfully launched campaigns like Lansing, Michigan, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and a few other places that have launched campaigns that successfully challenged junior ROTC. So we do have some precedent in terms of folk who actually fought the fight and won. It's going to be difficult, but I think that we basically here need to recognize that the power of nonviolence may not apparently win all the time, and certainly not in our time always, but it's going to win eventually, and that to get on the right side of that power and the right side of that argument, we need to oppose militarism in the schools. So without much more to say, I want to thank you all for being here. I hope I've perhaps answered a little bit about the origins of the expansion of junior ROTC and some of the work we're doing against it. And if you have any questions about anything I've said or omitted, please let me know right now. Thank you. Let me say something I think most of us recognize, and that is that the military in quote-unquote the post-Cold War epoch, and I'm not so sure the Cold War is ever over because there's always a war going on, you know, well, like say at least 40 wars going on right now in the world that are real wars, and that the U.S. usually has a hand in some if not all of them. But in the post-major power, you know, bipolar Soviet-U.S. epoch, the military has to reinvent its mission in order to justify the enormous amount of money it steals from us as taxpayers. We talked about the encroachment into education, but it's also getting involved in health care. It's also getting involved in housing. It's also getting involved in detention facilities. You know, it's also getting involved in, you know, international quote-unquote relief efforts, as we saw in Haiti and Somalia, and now that we're seeing in Bosnia. So, you know, in order to justify this enormous amount of money that's getting ripped off, if there's no Soviet Union that at least immediately is going to launch these huge weapons to blow us all up, then the military has to reinvent itself in the national psyche, and it's done a good job of that. So it's not inconceivable that there are people in the Pentagon in their 50-year planning, or even their shorter-term planning, who actually believe that at some point when social disintegration in the society reaches a critical, you know, kind of critical mass, i.e. blood in the streets. There's always blood in somebody's streets, but when blood starts happening in the streets where ain't no blood supposed to be shed, then I think they very often think of ways to intervene. I mean, they intervene openly in the internal affairs of many nations that have quote-unquote civil unrest, usually because of the contradictions created by the economic system dominated by this country. But it's not inconceivable that they're willing to do it here. And I think we need to be aware of, I mean, I think part of the mission that we have, you know, your mission, should you decide to accept it, that kind of thing, part of the mission is to fundamentally challenge, you know, all forms of violence, but specifically, in this case, armed, organized violence, and to expose it where it pops up. You know, I don't want the military training my doctors because it costs about 3 times more for a doctor to be trained in a military facility than it does at, you know, UW, or well, y'all call it UW, right? University of Washington, or Cornell, or wherever doctors get trained. I mean, it's enormously inefficient in its ability to do the same things that the quote-unquote civilian sector can do, and enormously efficient in the ability to project force and organize mass violence and kill lots of people more and more efficiently every year. So, I mean, it's a very dangerous thing. And when you're talking about trying to save our 18-year-olds from this, I take that seriously. Because, and let me just say this, most 18-year-olds, and because I was 18 and crazy, you know, I'm like 46 and crazy, but I was crazier then, you know, than I am now in some ways, that most 18-year-olds, I believe, fundamentally do what you know, people around them that they respect think is right. And if some of them believe that the authority figures in their lives are wearing uniforms, and that these are, generally okay people, but not necessarily working for a good cause, then they enlist because they think the people are okay, and they leave the other level of thinking to, the commanders. But the commanders themselves very often have no understanding of the kind of history that we understand. So we need to teach history as well as truth, and we need to make a clear argument for nonviolence as a force for redemption, as a force for economic justice, as a force for the liberation of all oppressed people, not just here but everywhere. Short answer is that very often part of the argument is in looking at the educational, quote-unquote, cost of a junior ROTC program, and what happens in many school systems, and it's happened in Providence, Rhode Island, and Hope High School, is that tenured teachers very often get displaced from schools because junior ROTC comes in as an elective and those teachers don't have classes to teach. Or the other argument is that it winds up costing roughly, I think, $50,000 per school, and the cost is usually hidden up front because the military negotiates a different division of cost between the local school district and the DOD in the first year, but then progressively in year 2, 3, 4, and so on, local schools pay more, military pays less. So there's an economic argument, particularly in terms of teachers and the cost of delivering an educational system or service. In some cases, young people who go in year 1 in a 4-year program drop out in the second year. There's a tremendous internal attrition rate in junior ROTC from the first year to the 4th year in a 4-year program. So a lot of the allies become young people and their families who, somehow don't think it's all that great an idea, when the young person's a senior versus how they felt when they were a sophomore. Another argument is just basically the idea that, nonviolent, proactive conflict resolution is cheaper and far more effective in terms of dealing with some of the internal problems that a school might have. Like a mentoring program doesn't have to be violent. That can take care of some of the needs that young people have for, some guidance from older people that are loving and caring and clear. A after-school tutorial program can do that. A nonviolent martial arts program can, teach discipline, but not in the destructive way that you learn discipline through, use of arms. So there are different things that different groups present. But I think that the core thing is that it doesn't work economically for the school system. It doesn't work economically for the young people who go into the military and wind up out of the military, and that it's violent and bad for society. And then, we can kind of invent the other reasons as circumstances, dictate. But those are the 3 basic reasons I see. Let me just say one thing. I think that one great resource that I didn't mention, but I'd like to just mention real quickly, is veterans groups, like Veterans for Peace or VVAW or other individual vets that, can talk about what war in the military is like, not from, theory, but from experience, are very valuable. And I think we ought to create ways in which that history and that personal experience gets in front of young people, either in the classroom or in community centers like this. One of the great things about the work that we do is that we're plugged into so many incredible folk. I mean, we have young people, we have World War II COs, we have Korean War. A Korean War CO is the chair of the National Board of the FOR. We have, Vietnam era and Persian Gulf era COs. We have a lot of people who've been through, the loop, so to speak, either resisted military service or they were in the military and got radicalized through what they saw. And I think we need to sort of, look at how that becomes part of the living history that the Howard Zinn talks about. We need to get our folk who are on our side, who are not necessarily, day-to-day peace activists or day-to-day educators, but who are educational people because they can teach, need to get them in front of young people. So you think the Army is a hip place to be, talk to somebody that's been there. You know what I'm saying? And that is far more effective than all the stuff I could say, because I've only been in Mickey Mouse ROTC for 2 years, but I left before I had to kill somebody or get killed doing it. But somebody who was actually on the front line, is a far more, effective communicator around that issue, I think. A broad coalition does not have to have agreement on every principle of nonviolence that, for example, is included in the statement of purpose of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, or, the statement of purpose of the War Resisters League. What I think we should do is, I mean, and there is no test of ideological purity because people in those organizations disagree about a lot of things. What I think we need to do, however, is as you say, as broadly as possible, reach out to people that are hurt by the military or that are potentially victimized by the military, and bring them into, some kind of working coalition where the understanding is that we need to get this program out of this school. And hopefully some folk might broaden their understanding and deepen their analysis. Like, for example, I did not, 10 years ago believe that nonviolence was necessarily workable in revolutionary ways. I'm very convinced that it does now, but that was because my understanding 10 years ago was less developed than it is right now. I mean, I had a lot to learn and still have a lot to learn, but I submit that a broad coalition where people will take a position against junior ROTC may have a lot of people focusing on it for different reasons, but there are enough reasons under the umbrella for everybody to have a good reason to kick it out. Sir. I don't quite think we've thought about that in the way that you're presenting it as a question, and maybe we need to. We do know about this thing called the cinema van, where I think people might have heard about this, but it's like this mobile, huge, moving van sized vehicle that inside is nothing but like a high-tech kind of video game picture of what it's like to fly an Apache attack helicopter or drive a tanker or this or that. And it does seduce and dazzle young people with all of the the technology that's somehow very removed from blood and killing, and brains and intestines being splattered around a jungle or a desert. I just think we need to, I don't think we can build stuff that's going to be that fun. I mean, I don't know if there's like something that the peace movement can build that folk can go inside it and turn into Gandhians as, when they come out. But on a serious tip, I think that that's real. And I just think, I don't know specifically what we could do around that, except just do what we do with more zeal. Even in peacetime, the military is one of the most dangerous occupations on the planet. If there's no war going on, I mean, I've heard that as many as 2,000 people die in training exercises and automobile accidents. I mean, it's a very dangerous place to be, even if you're not quote unquote at war, and we need to also make that point. Very, very quickly, the first answer is that 50% of the young people who graduate from JROTC go into the military. That's a statistical fact. More than 2/3 of their actual time is spent in military drill. And if you analyze the curriculum, it is full of glorification of war and glorification of the military as a central institution in the society. So it is a military program, whether they admit it or not. Number two, I would say that, yeah, it's a job, but it's also 8 years of your life. It's also possibly a dirty job, a bloody job, a murderous job, a dead-end job. And I try to unglamorize what you get out of it, because, I mean, Burger King is a job, but at least, even though it's not a high-paid job, you don't really, well, you might kill people, in terms of like colon cancer with that stuff, but, stop eating them hamburgers, right? But at least immediately it's not, a French fry is not immediately as lethal as a projectile, all right? And I would say that, yes, it is a job, but there are other jobs, and I don't believe in my heart that a young person that really wants to go to college, and really needs some help in getting some financial assistance is going to be completely unable to go. I think a lot of young people are discouraged because it's a little harder to get money, but they've got all kinds of money available that young people don't even know about. And I'm not saying enough, but I'm saying that the options to military service, although not necessarily well publicized, are there. And our job is to create more options, but also let people know that options do exist. And let me just say that, just real quick, that if you have not joined CDMCC, if you haven't joined the War Resisters League, if you haven't joined CCCO, if you haven't joined the Fellowship of Reconciliation, or any of the fine organizations that are here in Seattle struggling for nonviolence, please join somebody, make a commitment to this. Thank you.